Hey there, guys. Sina Mangaka here, doing a Worlds recap of the Group D results from the second week, third day of the 2015. Okay, we're way into the future now. 2015 World Championship. We're going to be going pretty much over every game because there is something a little interesting to talk about in each one. It's a day of slumping and stepping up at the same time, as well as broken dreams and the end of a rather relatively illustrious career. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the first matchup of the day, which, not that particular overlay. This was Team Solo Mid versus Origin. This is how we started off our day. And immediately, this is kind of like pulls up some red flags as far as like this groups go, because TSM in every one of their games today makes it particularly close. They have these phenomenal, well, maybe phenomenal is a strong word, a very good start to the early game. They get like these really good advantages building for themselves. They play the first 10 minutes of this game well, and then come the mid game, it completely goes to crap. It does, and I don't understand really why in this case. So looking at the comps here, we see a draft of Kennen for SOAS. We're going to see that a lot today, and it's going to be iffy at a point in time. We see, like, you know, it's a very standard in like hard engage comp with a bit of a protect the Kog'Maw element in there. It wants to flank. It's got a lot of AoE damage, and the goal of it is to go about stacking dragons, which Origin actually does. They do get up to the 5 dragon mark in this game. This is a very long game, and this is a theme throughout all the games today, as it's there's some surprising, it's a surprising level of performance from TSM in all of these games. This first comp I really like coming out of TSM. It's an easy to play comp. It focuses on just getting these advantages. You land one skill shot, you land skill shot after skill shot after skill shot. You have Lustboy on the Morgana, Bjergsen on Syndra. It's a pick that he was very well known for early on in his career. And then you all have Santorin on Elise, and then you have Dyrus on the Malphite. So it's a very, and Turtle on his standard Jinx. It's a very good comp, and TSM plays this very well. They're getting the vision in deep into the jungle. Santorin is ganking. Like, there's a gank at 5 minutes that he does. That's very unusual for Santorin. He's a very passive player, but in this game, and in this day, he finally realizes that, oh, I should be like ganking or something. It's very perplexing to see that. And in TSM, they're doing this. They're threatening these objectives. They're making these plays, getting some early kills, and then they stop. And then they completely stop pushing this advantage. They stop getting these deep wards. They stop going for these picks, and then they just let Origin keep taking these dragons, keep on pushing out the side waves, and they eventually just crumble. And it's just really unfortunate for TSM fans, I suppose, that this is like the result of it after TSM looks so good in the early game, and they just fall completely apart come the mid game. Now, in the case of Dyrus, he just doesn't really do a whole lot in this game. His ultimates are particularly off on the Malphite. He's not really, and TSM just looks, the biggest issue is that TSM looks incredibly disjointed with players splitting up in all these different directions. Turtle, throughout the day in all these games, runs off on his own and gets killed because he's mispositioning as he's retreating. Dyrus isn't engaging properly at the right times to lock down the damage that needs to be done. So it's a very, Team Solo Mid having, while they have these good early games, which lead to the games being rather prolonged, as well as them, as these teams, constantly dance around the Baron pit, ultimately it's just a very poor ability to team fight that seals TSM in basically every game that they played. And now Origin, they seem to, kind of played at TSM's level rather than kind of like playing the level that we saw them against KT Rolster, so I'm not quite sure why that is the case. They still win this game, but it's not like this demanding, punishing thing. To be fair, though, their comp is requiring a little bit more time to scale, and TSM does get an early lead. But, Origin kind of just, somewhat playing at TSM's level, and, maybe not taking this matchup so seriously, and TSM surprising them a little bit. Might be something to consider, but ultimately, it's a fairly long game. Origin closed it out. Fairly little bit, of a mess, but TSM ultimately do go to lose this game. So the next game right after this one is LGD versus KT Rolster, and so this is immediately a game of high tension for two reasons. One, if LGD loses this game, they are eliminated from playoff contention. There's no way they can qualify for playoffs because they will not get enough wins to tie with KT or with Origin. So they would be eliminated from playoff contention. So if they lose this game, basically there's only one more quote-unquote relevant game that we need to play on out. Now I've been delaying this long enough as I'm scouring around looking for this wonderful image right here. Someday plays Renekton in this game, so it's our third Renekton performance of the day, and wow, is it a good one. So the second reason, if I didn't already mention, as to why this game is interesting, is that LGD sub out their top laner Acorn, who they've been using for the majority of the summer split, and they put in Flame, a legendary player from the CJ organization, went over to China for all the monies. He's been sitting on the bench because Acorn's been performing really well, but LGD brought him on in, thinking that, hey, it's a top lane carry meta, maybe he can perform well. In this game against Someday, and against the LGD lineup, not really. This is probably LGD's best draft so far in this game, and once more, we're seeing this approach that Origin showed up with first at the world stage, which is ban out TBQ's junglers. Lee Sin is denied him, the Rek'Sai is denied, and LGD just ban the Elise because they just know, all right, well, you're going to be taking it. So we might as well just let that go through. This gives Lulu over to KT Rolster, and that's something that I think that LGD failed to adapt successfully. Instead of banning the Elise or the Lulu, maybe throw out a target ban, and then, make them choose between, okay, you can either get a jungler for yourself, or, you can take Lulu, and then, we can get TBQ on a jungler you're comfortable with, and we'll figure out a way to deal with your Lulu. Or you can take the Elise, keep denying TBQ, but then we'll get the Lulu. Aside from that, though, they come up with this, and they also don't ban the Mordekaiser. So instead of the Elise, I would have seen the Mordekaiser. But, instead, they don't ban the Mordekaiser, and then they let KT get both Lulu and Mordekaiser. It's kind of insane. They pick Tristana for Imp early on when there's no reason to contest it. They have KT has Mordekaiser. It's not, AD carry is not contested. You just grab Lulu so you can have something to, set Imp up with all the tools to succeed, to kite back the Mordekaiser. It's rather crazy that they let KT win this draft so hard. It's one of the reasons that LGD had such an underperformance at this World Championship tournament that led to them exiting out. So we see Flame put on the Darius. We see God V try to use the Anivia, trying to keep KT Rolster away from them. Wave clear super hard, scale in the late game with the Tristana and with the Anivia, but KT doesn't have they have none of that. Someday has a huge performance on the Renekton in this game. Arrow and Peekaboo are doing fantastic in the bottom lane. There's a flashy play from Peekaboo saving Arrow, where everyone people are stopping Arrow from getting onto the Lantern. He hooks PYL, pulls him off the Lantern, and Arrow is able to take it out. It's very clean play. Nagne on this Lulu. He's not being quite as exposable as he is when he doesn't have his Azir band, or when he's not on the Azir. These are two champions that he, basically shouldn't be allowed to have. And, I mean, really, KT just closed out this game. They don't really seem to use the Dragon also well. They kind of just, you see Arrow kind of just letting it farm minions instead of either hitting the tower or hitting the enemy champions instead. So they're not really too proactive with playing around the Mordekaiser, it seems like, just yet. And it's a very dominating performance. TBQ does nothing on the Evelynn. I mean, he cosplays it very well in this game by not really getting any early ganks out. And then the game rolls around and KT's just too far ahead. And it's a very decisive victory. And this ends LGD's Worlds run effectively. And so the Flame strategy didn't work in this game. And then it must be frustrating to be like a hardcore LGD fan, just because of what comes on later on in the group. So with this, KT Rolster secures themselves spot in the playoff run now. They just have to beat Origin to settle the tiebreaker case there and see what happens. So then the next game that we got to look at, I'm trying to remember the order of them correctly. I believe LGD plays Origin next. I want to say they play Origin next. Or was it TSM versus KT? No, it's not 3 games in a row with KT. Let's go to Origin versus LGD, because this is where we can really begin to sort of look at um, Origins Day. They don't look as good in this day as they did in the first week, namely because they actually lose games in this week, and one of them is against this LGD Gaming, who has these again like somewhat hilarious draft choices. They early pick the Graves or Imp when it's not going to be contested. They get TBQ on Agragas, and it's fairly bad, but it's an actual jungler. And then suddenly, it almost seems in this game, and based on just some comments from Chinese analysts, China regional analyst, I don't know how to exactly say this, the China experts, quote unquote. We'll just stick with that title for right now, just lacking a better structure in my own mind in this moment. And LGD like find their identity again, and it's just like, well, where the hell was this? What the crap? Now you turn it on. Holy moly. I mean, God V, he's split pushing. That's something that he's been very well known for and really strong with. He's going in, he's making these like super cool plays. TBQ's getting some ganks down. They're getting some pressure on the mid lane. PYL, he's just doing this amazing job on the Janna. Imp's coming on over for these flanks, just buckshotting everybody to death. And they beat Niels' Callista, which is it's a very impressive showing there. And Flame pops off in this game. He goes 6-1 and 6, as you can see, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's a bloody mess for Origin in this game. Now Origin, they are already secured themselves a place in the in the quarterfinals, and so there's not a whole lot of reason to take this game too seriously. It's important in the sense that if they want to make sure that KT has to force a tiebreaker game with them to fight for first place. That way they avoid SK Telecom in the quarterfinals as a potential matchup. I don't know what Origin is thinking in the back of their minds, but this is a very complacent Origin in this game. We don't really see them being as proactive as they usually are. The fighting all around is fairly sloppy from them, and LGD come on together to give us at least a bit of a performance at this tournament. So then the other game to look at before we go on to the last two games of the day, and I don't know if I got the orders of these two games wrong, but who knows. This would be the TSM versus KT game. And now this one is also another long game. It goes on for 46 minutes, 10 minutes shorter than the TSM versus Origin game, admittedly. But this one is it's a fantastic game from Peekaboo on his Janna. He's takes this non-playmaking champion, makes it a playmaker in a couple instances. It's very cool showing up there. We see KT Rolster going for this approach of denying Wild Turtle his jinx by taking it for themselves, and it's not a champion that plays too often, and he does an okay job on it in this particular game. This forces Wild Turtle onto Kog'Maw. Let's Play goes to the Morgana pick again. Santorin and Dyrus go for their same picks as well, but Bjergsen goes for the Veigar since Nagne secures his Azir. Now, if you remember the first game, Nagne really being shown up by Bjergsen, getting bullied around in the laning phase, denied the Azir first time around, but now, or I think he had the Azir, I can't remember, but Nagne steps up his game with the Azir on this one. He has a couple of really good plays to make a couple of last moves in the team fight to set KT up for victory here. And Someday goes for the Olaf as well. And I like the Olaf pick in the sense that now he can just ignore the Veigar, chase down that back line, doesn't really care for the event horizon, but before that point and around that, it's something to work with. And again, TSM, really good early game. Bjergsen is able to pick up 2 kills and 2 assists in this 4-man playing the bottom lane. They're playing with this double teleport stuff, and they set up this dive, and Arrow goes down. I think Arrow might have picked up a kill, but Bjergsen gets 2 kills and 2 assists, as I mentioned before. And so there's a real potential to snowball this one out. He's as he grows powerful, stronger in the game, he's able to start one-shotting Nagne. He does it one time, but Bjergsen really not pushing his advantage, really not like going for these just like explode the enemy opportunities, putting the team on his back, and it shows in the stats. Bjergsen doing less damage than Wild Turtle in this game, which is something ridiculous to consider, considering that TSM and Bjergsen, he on average deals 45% of his team's damage, so it's quite an underperformance from Bjergsen in the sense of him pushing his advantage and going for these one-shots. Dyrus is a little better in this game, but again, Sunday pops off. Nagne has these huge Azir making plays, and Arrow just overall great positioning in most of the fights. And Peekaboo peeling everybody off and away from it. It's a fantastic game from KT Rolster in that sense, barring their early game that was fairly rough. A lot of dragons going back and forth to either side as the game kind of goes to and fro. And TSM, again, making these somewhat competitive. giving Bjergsen a couple more tools, I suppose, to carry these games. Given like these earlier snowballing champions, a lot more just simple CC to follow up with it. If you get hit by this one skill shot, then we have this next skill shot. It's a very good composition coming in from TSM, which really boosted their chances. And they played the early game well, but they just stopped pressing that advantage, and they team fought ridiculously poorly. I mean, Someday gets alone with Wild Turtle like 2 or 3 times in this game because here's TSM running away, here's Turtle branching off, and up here's Someday coming on in there. Hello, Kog'Maw. It's just same old from Wild Turtle, sadly to say. So, but again, aside from those, TSM stepping up and making these somewhat long games. Then we have KT versus Origin. And so what KT did after their first week of play is that they said, okay, Origin beat us by out-rotating us. They had the double teleport on their players, moved around the map incredibly well. We also double teleport. They matched our global pressure with their own global pressure. So let's just completely win the global pressure war. Teleport in top lane, Rek'Sai ultimate, teleport in mid lane with Nagne's Diana, Jinx global rocket ultimate so she can at least attempt to join in some fights across the map, and then Peekaboo support Shen. He's never played support Shen in his career. It's his first time doing it. And, I mean, this is just, like, massive. Like, Soaz, as you can see, just gets bodied by Someday in this game. It's such a disgusting stop. And Someday, it's an amazing game for him. And what we see with KT in this game is that they're getting, they get the early advantages. They're able to pull these plays off. And they're making really good use of this global pressure just to constantly punish Origin. But where this game gets a little competitive and a little closer is that KT gets a little too excited and they go for these dives that they don't have to. Nagne in particular is like, hey, I want to kill Amazing under his tower. Let's go. And then, the Niels is in the back line, and then all of KT is like, oh no, I gotta help him out. And then it blows up in their face, and that gives Origin a little bit of wiggle room. So KT getting a little too excited, trying to force their advantage a bit too much, and they overdive in these cases, something that happened consistently through this game. And so it's an issue that they're going to have to try and pull back on, because if you have advantage like that, that's a really great way of letting a team back into the game. That's something that could bite them as they go on to the quarterfinals. With KT's win in this game, they secure first place for the groups themselves. They give Origin the second seed spot, and so KT will not be able to play against SK Telecom, but they will be able to be matched up against EDG, Coup Tigers, which they beat in a very competitive game back in the summer playoffs, and then whoever the second place team comes out of Group D. So there are a couple options and potentials there for everybody. So with all that being said, this is a really good game to watch just to see the global pressure coming out from the KT lineup. They use this incredibly well. Very rotational game, but a very action-packed game. Someday just really showing how to push his advantage, and he just has a stomp of performance on Darius. And Nagne, he shows up better against Speke with the Diana into the Azir, but he just really overcommits a lot in a lot of these cases. Xpeke wins a 1v1 with him because he expends too many spells just getting to Xpeke. So Nagne, a player who is someone who is exposable against some of the better teams. So, well, with stronger mid laners, I should say. So we'll have to see how that goes for them, depending on the matchup that they have in the quarterfinals. And then the last game of the day, the game that is truly just a show match, but played with some dignity, I suppose. With dignity, not some dignity, with dignity, is the Team Solo Mid versus LGD game. So, this is something kind of similar. We see Dyrus put onto Gnar, trying to counter the Flame matchup. We see Bjergsen going with a Lissandra in this game up against Godvy's LeBlanc. Imp goes for his Vayne pick, and he actually also runs the SKT skin on it. It's kind of a funny moment for me. PYL goes for the Tom Kench. Kind of trolls around in this game, like ults into Team Solo Mid. He just walks up and gets killed a couple times, well, like once, not a couple times. It's a little like more of a kind of somewhat a relaxed game, but TSM are really trying to take a win off of this one, because this is what is potentially and most likely Dyrus's last professional game of League of Legends in his career. He is retiring after this Worlds. He's not going to be playing anymore. As far as a competitive stance goes, it was a very emotional time. In fact, even though LGD win this game, Dyrus does get the post-game interview. just for that case. And he also dies his first blood in this game, so that's just somewhat depressing and yet fitting at the same time, I suppose, just given the entire historical context for his career. And so, yeah, ultimately, I mean, this is a very flashy God v play on the LeBlanc. Very good in play as well, and you just kind of sit there wondering, like, where was this stuff, you know, when you guys had a chance to get the hell out of this group, you know? It's like, what the hell? This game is a little shorter than the other ones that TSM has played. It's a bit chaotic and messy, but LGD just turned on their team fight finally, and they just completely crushed Team Solomon in this game. Like, I mean, Wild Turtle just gets completely exposed in these fights. I mean, 8 kills. Godvi just continually assassinates him in the back line. Flame is doing, he gets a couple of dunks going on in this game for himself. So it's a very decisive game from LGD. And Team Solomid, though, having a fairly good early game at the start. And with that, this summarizes the Group D showing up. Origin looked very strong in their first week. They had an answer for everybody, but they kind of seemed a little more lackadaisical. Not too, you know, a little less pressure on them to perform. And so, you know, who knows if they were just kind of easing back and saying, hey, you know, we got to spot out quarterfinals. We don't need to win these games. Let's not show our hands right now. Or, you know, we want to see how other teams like KT Rolster are going to be responding to us coming on through here. And so, you know, who really knows like how to interpret this one? But KT really showing how they can adapt, how they bounce back from victories, and so they'll be looking to be a strong contender coming into the quarterfinals. Probably, you know, a likelihood to make the semifinals and probably stop there. But you know, who really knows what to say at this point coming into this tournament, giving everything. LGD, league's greatest disappointment. Finally showing a couple glimpses of the LGD that we were expecting to show up after they failed to qualify to get out of the semi. Out of the group stage into the quarterfinals. So it's a very depressing kind of state to consider, and it really is something that brings the whole competitive level of the tournament down. There's just a lot of teams that, you know, were looking good coming into this tournament that just aren't living up to the expectations now. A couple teams such as Origin and Cloud9 have been blowing those expectations out of the water, but what we were hoping to see from these teams, and what really is saddening about some of the events that we're seeing at this tournament, is that these teams, we're seeing these rises of some teams, which is cool, but we're also seeing these complete drop-offs of other teams, and these simultaneously happening are completely flipping the power balance coming to this tournament. You know, it's one thing, you know, to come in and beat like one of one of the strongest opponents that you can face at the tournament. You know, when he's at his best, he's going to come at you full swing and he's going to do his quintessential moves and stuff. You know, he's in his prime, rather than the guy who, you know, he's rusty, he's put on a couple of weight after a couple of years of taking off, and, you know, you challenge him then. It's not the same thing, and that's kind of what it's like for me, considering LGD being eliminated so early. And this is another factor which really just makes me think that SKT is going to take this whole tournament, because LGD was supposed to be a team that could contend with them. They had like a, you know, arguably a stronger duo lane in the bottom lane. They had a mid laner who could arguably compete with Faker. They had a really good top laner that could probably go par and toe-to-toe with Marin. I mean, you know, say for the jungle position, which we clearly seen has been exposed, you know, LGD could have theoretically challenged SK Telecom, and that could have been for a very exciting series. But with them dropping off in this way, you know, the likelihood of that happening and SKT being beaten at this tournament, and when they've looked invincible practically, just doesn't seem quite so likely anymore, especially when you consider that KT Rolster, who went 5-1 in this group and decisively came back against Origin, who, again, we don't know how serious they were playing in that game, so that is a questionable showing. They got 3-0'd by SK Telecom in the finals in Korea. So, you know, we know how those matchups are probably going to play out. I don't think a Korean team is going to be capable of beating SK Telecom. These Chinese teams that were coming in were supposed to be either a match for SK Telecom, capable of beating them, and they're just not showing up. And particularly EDG and LGD. Maybe EDG can pull it back together, get into a more comparable form to SK Telecom by the end of this tournament. But with LGD gone, you know, it's been a very crazy time so far. So that brings an end to the discussion about Group D. Only one more group to go, guys. We'll see if Cloud9 can you know, secure a single win, qualify for quarterfinals, and keep the Cinderella run alive. So we'll be seeing that in about 12 hours from now. Actually, 11 hours from the time I'm making this video, and a little less time from the time that you guys probably see this. So thank you so much for watching this, guys. Been a pleasure serving. doing these things. Expect more out of me in the future. So thank you guys.